Hello, and welcome to our final project podcast. Today we're going to be discussing the relationship between different religious wars and events and how they pull society together and how they pull us apart. I'm joined here with Hannah Bird, Madison Armstrong, Mason Timmons, Camuel de Jesus, and I'm Alexa Key. We're going to start out and attack this chronologically, starting with the Black Death. Hannah?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Black Death. So what was it? It was a plague that swept across Asia and Europe in the 14th century. It's probably the most well-known pandemic. I think pretty much everybody knows, at least like generally what it is. Super infectious disease. So it really starts in Asia. That was something that I learned that I thought was really interesting. It started in 1343 when the Mongol Empire and the Mongol army was trying to attack Italian merchants, and they pushed them into the land of like the Crimean Peninsula, which was called Kaffa at the time. And people in this Mongol army had developed this sickness, and so the army was trying to get into Kaffa, but there was walls, barricading them out. So they just started catapulting these dead bodies into the city, and they would get in there and then infect a bunch of people. And people kept getting sick, so the Italian people, they left that peninsula to go off to, different trading lands. Maybe it was Constantinople. That was the next place that the plague really broke out. So that's really how it all spread, and it shows just how connected our world really was back in the 14th century. And the thing that I thought was really interesting is that once it got to Europe, people tried to relate it to God. That's how most things were back in the medieval era. So many people would call out to God to try to save them from the plague, but whenever he didn't answer them, it really took away a lot of like the Catholic Church's power, and it kind of led to that eventual collapse that we see in the 16th century with Martin Luther and stuff, because they're thinking, the Catholic Church, it isn't working. They're not able to actually stop this plague, so God must be punishing us. The Catholic Church must not be the right one. Amongst all of this, Christian writers were telling people to burn Jews, and people killed and burned Jews and other groups of people. But no matter how many people died, it just kept going. And that's obviously nowadays we know that, it's related to science, not the will of God and religion. But that's how some people took it. And some extremists even took on like flatulence, which means that they would take a whip and they would whip their bodies and they would hurt themselves to try to suffer just like Jesus suffered, in an attempt to rid their body of the sin that they had, so they would get rid of the plague. And that movement actually became very mainstream, even though it was thought to be an extremist group. So it really starts out our conversation of religion in a really interesting way with a massive plague. So I just like to hear what you guys thought about that as we move forward with this conversation.
So my main question to you is, how widespread was the plague? So it started in the Mongol army, but how far into Europe did it spread? Was it to the Iberian Peninsula and into Africa, or was it just a Europe and Asia thing?
Well, it was most prominent in Europe, obviously, and Asia. It also spread to Africa. So it's pretty much spread everywhere. It actually took out, a major part of Europe.
Thank you, Hannah. Now we're going to move on to our next topic, which is the 30 Years' War with Madison.
Okay, so the 30 Years' War was a conflict in the Roman Empire in 1618 to 1648, and it was started by religious tension between the Catholics and the Protestants, along with other political ambitions. And the war basically became a symbol of destructive power of competing belief systems. The armies justified mass cruelty as violence committed in God's name. People suffered disease and widespread destruction, and the way that they interpreted their suffering was seeing it as a part of divine plan from God. Globally, it demonstrated that religious conflict could fracture entire regions and reorder global power. Overall, it highlights how religious identity and political interests can intertwine, weaving parts of Europe together while also violently tearing them apart.
I just want to add on to that the Peace of Westphalia, which ended the 30 Years' War, was signed in 1648. I think that really highlights how it separated Christianity from the monarch and like the kingdom, and it really drove us apart because it allowed for other denominations, but it also joined us together because it gave the power to kingdom heads like princes to be able to decide if they wanted to be Christian or Catholic or Protestant or whatever nature of denomination of Christianity they wanted to be a part of. And that, I think, pulled together other countries. Like, it pulled together Germany, because Germany at this time was like different little states, and they weren't really together. Protestantism really pulled together Germany, and it also aligned different countries with each other rather than all being forced to believe in Catholicism. And with that, we're going to move on to the Taiping Rebellion with Kemwell.
The Taiping Rebellion was a conflict that lasted from the years 1850 to 1864 and began as a result of a Chinese man named Hong Xiaoshun failing his imperial examinations for a third time. Soon after failing, he fell into psychosis for 30 days, and when he came to, he claimed that he had seen visions from God, and he claimed that he had been the second son of God and Jesus' brother. He soon created a new belief system where he primarily based those beliefs off of the Old Testament of the Christian Bible, with specific emphasis on the wrathful ideologies that demanded worship and obedience among followers. Taiping Christianity was made up of extremely strict rules that were believed to benefit and purify China, such as prohibition of smoking, gambling, and prostitution, to name a few. And then looking to the event as a whole, the rebellion really began when a religious group known as the God Worshipper Society assembled with Hong to form the Taiping Christianity Force. Driven by a primary belief to share property in common, many famine-stricken individuals, workers, and poor citizens of China joined the rebellion. Additionally, the group promoted propaganda disregarding the foreign rule of Manchu China. As time passed, ranks began to grow to well over 1 million members, and after expanding past the Yangtze River territories, the forces reached eastern city of Nanjing. They eventually captured it in 1853, renaming it Tianjin, the heavenly capital. Forces began to slow down after attempts to raid Shanghai and Beijing failed, and by 1862, gentry that were unified under the Qin commander Zhang Guofan organized and took back Nanjing in 1864. Soon after this, Huang Xiaozhan committed suicide. This event was driven by radical Christian ideology spread widely by one man who sought to rationalize his failure with the Chinese examinations with religious psychosis. During this time, the majority of China was not practicing Christianity, but Confucianism. And as a result of Xiaoshan's religious ideas, there was mass division in China, leading to the death of over 20 million Chinese citizens, and demonstrating that religion, in this case, has the power to pull apart all of China.
Thinking about what we're about to talk about, or what Mason's about to talk about with, modern day Christianity and Christian nationalism in America, I think it's just very interesting and powerful how, religion was able to be used to influence a vulnerable population, like how he came in and was able to use the rhetoric of religion to just fully convince this entire population to follow him, or not the entire population, but a large majority. It just shows how powerful that really is, and I think that gives a lot of lead into what we're about to talk about.
To further Hannah's point, I think that this one man who was able to bring an entire country to its knees and really believe in Christianity is seen in America today with Christian nationalism, and how I don't think it's as intense of a turn to Christian nationalism as he convinced people in China to believe in Christianity in such a short period of time. But there's definitely been a tie-in since Reagan's era and since the 1960s, where people have turned more towards Christianity and infusing that in the identity of being an American. It's no longer Peace of Westphalia time where we're separating church and state, or monarch and pope. It's now being infused together in America. And we'll give this to Mason, who will talk about Christian nationalism.
Hello, so I'm Mason, and I'm going to be talking about Christian nationalism. And for the people that don't know what that is, it's basically the belief that America, as a nation, is a Christian nation that should have laws based on the Christian Bible. And this belief spawns from the fact that the founding fathers are we're Christian, and that our Constitution has words saying to the effect that our rights come from a creator. And for the most part, religion has been a very important part of the nation. And in recent years, and by that I mean 1950s, it really picks up with the changing of our nation's motto from E pluribus unum, which means from many to one, to In God We Trust, because of the Cold War and the enactment in more recent years of 10 Commandments in some schools and Bibles in some schools. It really shows the slow increase in the amount of Christianity you see in daily life.
Something to further Mason's point is, I learned about this a couple days ago, but during the time of getting the 19th Amendment passed in the 1920s, there was a large group of women in the West who were really focused on using that right to vote to tell other women to not vote, which is crazy because it seems counterintuitive and it seems really weird to be able to use your right to hold office and vote to then just tell people that you shouldn't be doing this. But it was to further the point that God did not create women equal to man. Like, you were supposed to be subservient to your husband, and this is seen as a early foundation of conservatism and Christian nationalism in America, which is very odd because we often don't think about the women's right to vote and the first wave of feminism in America as something so, I guess, hateful. But this was a really large movement out west, women wanting to use their rights to tell other women to not use their rights.
I think it's interesting how people will use religion to justify the suffering they go through. Like with the Black Death, people justified their sickness as a punishment from God. And with the Taiping Rebellion, they merged political authority with religious beliefs. And in current America, Christian nationalists justify any criticism they go through by saying it's righteous suffering from God.
So now I'm going to open this up to discussion, and so we can answer those two main questions of how religion pulls us apart and brings us together, and how we use religion to justify and our actions.
So going off of that question on how religion has torn and brought people together, I want to bring up the point of the events of 9/11 and specifically what happened afterwards. So afterwards, there was an uptake in anti-Muslim propaganda. People were really honing in this idea that Muslims were terrorists, even though that's not true, obviously. But the idea that Christianity was like something good and that Muslims or Islam was something incorrect was really hammered into every American at that point. And I think that really brought together, obviously, the Christians, but then tore apart the American communities because there are Muslims in our communities that live here, and obviously they're not going to want to be associated with people that hate them. So I really think that helped emphasize the division that religion can cause.
Well, I mean, obviously we see that Christian nationalism is an extremely unifying force. If you want to associate Christian nationalism with some parts of the Republican Party, voting for, Donald Trump recently, I would say that most Christian nationalists would totally be, voting for Trump. That's like the candidate they would support. And there's a lot to be said for how unified that party is and how unified they're able to be because they believe one sole thing. It's a very simple idea. There's not a lot of nuance. There's not a lot of room to disagree. So it really, really, really brings people together, especially when you invoke the idea of like God, a divine being who is all powerful. So you have to listen to what this person says because he's all powerful. So it's a very interesting just thought and an idea behind that.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. I hope this gave you some fresh perspectives on some of the topics we talked about. Really quickly, I'll just cite some of our sources. Our music came from freemusicarchive.org. It is I Remember You by Marzipan. And we gathered our information for our podcast from Britannica, specifically Hung Jia Chuan and In God We Trust. We also used a website, Asia for Educators, Weatherhead East Asian Institute, Columbia University. And we used a couple video essays from YouTube, We use BBC News, How a New Christian Right is Changing U.S. Politics, Real Stories, American Heretics, The Politics of Gospel, NBC News, Evangelicals from Pulpit to Politics, as well as History.com, 30 Years War.